Welcome to The Investor, a podcast where I, Joel Palafinkel, your host, dives deep into the minds of the world's most influential institutional investors. In each episode, we sit down with an investor to hear about their journeys and how global markets are driving capital allocation. So join us on this journey as we explore these insights. So great. So it looks like we're live here. We're with a friend of mine, Shelby Clark. I'm really excited to have him on the show today. Really amazing founder and entrepreneur and, investor. Just met Shelby a couple months ago, but just, fortunate to meet him. He leads investments at Lionheart Ventures. He's going to talk about that a little more, but, before that, he was a founder of Turo. So if you guys know Turo, I don't know what the inventory is, but, I'm assuming if you want to rent a G-Wagon, for an affordable price within your community. I mean, I'm in New York City.
Best place to find one for sure.
Yeah, so G-Wagon, maybe a Rolls Royce. Use Turo.
Lots of Teslas.
Lots of Teslas. Yeah. So let's any Cybertrucks available on Turo yet?
Probably. I haven't looked at that specifically, but I mean, there's the inventory is as diverse as the community. So pretty much anything you can dream up, you'll be able to find somewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, I told I warned Shelby about this, but like it's just I met Shelby at an event, a couple months ago now, and I was just casually talking to him. We were just chatting about stuff, and we were like 30 minutes into the conversation. He's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I founded this company called Turo." And for me, that's just like one of the biggest, platforms out there. So it's just crazy. Like, when you go to, in-person events, just kind of the amazing, interesting people that you meet. So honored to have you here, Shelby. I think there's a lot to unpack. Just a huge, plethora of things to just go deep on. So excited to jump right into it. I mean, why don't we start with your early career? What did you, want to pursue initially in your career? I know, and I got to know you personally, so I know a lot of your evolution. But there's stuff that we haven't talked about. So talk about your early career. What you studied initially, what you thought you wanted to do, and then I'd love to kind of go deep on the origin story of how you started Turo.
Sure. All right. Well, I'll try and keep. First of all, thanks for having me, Joel. I really enjoyed meeting you as well a couple months ago, and so it's really fun to come back and be able to have another conversation here. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
And answering your question, so it's the path has been very long and winding, and I think that like as I've let the path be winding instead of like trying to really control things, I've found a lot more sort of ease in life, which has felt great in the past probably 5 years. My career started I was a biotechnology or a biomedical engineer in college. I was a math and science geek, really quantitative and just loved numbers. And I had a pretty important experience. Unfortunately, my father passed away in my sophomore year of college. He had a sudden heart attack, and I just became really interested in the idea of technology in the body. Are there things that I could have prevented this for him or for other people? And so I ended up majoring in biomedical engineering, thinking that eventually my career would take me to the intersection of business and biotech. And so my first job out of college was in management consulting. It was a pretty brutal couple of years. I wouldn't really wish it on anybody, but I'm glad that I did it. I think it really helped me learn how to solve big problems with numbers. And then I got a job at a biotech-focused hedge fund. I guess before that, while I was in management consulting, I took a nonprofit fellowship. So my firm let you take take 6 months off and go volunteer somewhere. And so I volunteered for a company called Kiva.org. Kiva was sort of like one of the first Web 2.0 nonprofits. It was a nonprofit startup that was it had sort of roots from PayPal, and just really best practices of how to build a consumer internet company. And so Kiva does it still does peer-to-peer microfinance lending. So you could contribute to a small loan to somebody really anywhere around the world. And I think I was the 6th employee and sort of got in right as the rocket ship was taking off.
Sure.
And it was just so inspiring.
I mean, what was that? When I ask you a role at employee 6, it's probably everything, right? You probably do marketing, product, everything. But Was it kind of a jack of all
Interesting.
trades, or did they want you to specifically focus on something?
Interestingly, it quickly became risk, which is like wasn't
Oh,
expected.
interesting.
I think that
Yeah.
like what we understood was that like we needed to have better risk controls in
Mm-hmm.
order to scale.
Yeah.
Um, and so like I helped think like, what does risk mean? But what was fascinating was like this was just a lot of people who really knew nothing about microfinance and just a lot of passion and locked in a room. And so like, what can we do? And like, how can we hold on to
Mm-hmm.
the, keep the wheels on the bus as it's starting to take off?
Yeah.
And it was a really inspiring place to be. I think there was just deep impact built into the company. Like as the company did better, the impact grew, and I started to see that a business with a uh, an impact deeply ingrained in sort of the why of the company, could have just a huge impact on the world. And so as I think Kiva really did. And it's in contrast to my work in biotech. I briefly after that was I worked at a biotech focused hedge fund. There's a lot of like structure, like you've got to do a lot of things in order to to get a drug or therapy approved by the FDA
Yeah.
and out into the world. And so
Mm-hmm.
I sort of loved the freedom that consumer internet provided. And so I ended up taking a big turn in my career away from biotech and starting really in consumer internet and just saying, wow, like what can we build in a way that can like both create a really beautiful valuable business, but also really creating some real impact in the world. Um, so I decided I wanted to start a company, but didn't have any ideas or time or money or
Mm-hmm.
partners. I think it might be helpful in that. And so ended up getting an MBA at Harvard, enrolled in the fall of 2008, and very quickly came up with an idea for what became Turo. Um, and so, academics sort of became this cute hobby, and focused pretty much all of my time and energy on getting Turo off the ground. And happy to dive into that a little more. We can circle back to it if you like. Um, and it was a pretty wild ride. It still has been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Turo's still around and doing really well. Last year we did several $billion in revenue. The company is now profitable. We filed our S1 to go public. But it hasn't been all this up into the right. I mean, there's been lots of setbacks and twists and turns, and it's been a really complicated process.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the the tactical things of like how do we bring down our customer acquisition costs and find scalable acquisition channels, and
Yeah.
um, you know uh, define have a positive process with OKRs and the whole team aligned, but also the really human aspects of this, like
Yeah.
how do you handle the stress of being a CEO? I had some, on being transparent, I just some real issues with anxiety throughout that process, and it's just there's some like very challenging and human aspects of growing a business. And so we ended up bringing on a CEO relatively early in my career. There, we're in between our Series A and Series B, and I overlapped the CEO for about a year. Andre is still there and has been an incredible hire and doing an absolutely great job. I went on and started another company. It's called peers.org, and it aimed to be sort of a benefits platform for independent workers, beginning with the sharing economy. And that failed.
Mm-hmm.
And so after that, I found myself in quite a funk. Like what I had this identity as an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, well, what do I do now? Do I need to start another company? At this point, Turo is doing pretty well. So if I do start a company, does it have to be more successful? What is success? Like, is it raising more money or like a higher valuation, or is it about impact? And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
when is there enough impact, or what is going to be enough? And so in this really in a bit of a depression, I decided, a bit of a whim, I decided to do yoga teacher training. I called my sister and said, let's go to Bali and do a yoga teacher training. And she's like, I don't want to be a yoga teacher. I was like, neither do I. Let's go to Bali. So we did, and just
So it
had a
was a
really
course on
profound
how to be a yoga. It was a course on how to be a yoga instructor. Okay.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people go and do them, just to sort of deepen their own practice. And,
Yeah.
I think that what I knew was that when I was doing yoga, I felt better. Like when I was, present in the moment, moving my body, like things just sort of flowed a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
And the teacher training sort of caught me off guard. I think I grew a lot more and than I expected. And at the end of that yoga training, I did my first psilocybin journey. So mushrooms for those who don't know, but I guess I'd done mushrooms many times beforehand, but more like giggling at a music festival. And
Yeah.
this was the first time it was done with a lot of reverence and intention. And it was just a beautiful, profound experience. I think that I found sort of the world around me melt away, which could be sort of terrifying. But in that feeling connected to everything. And it just fundamentally changed the way they view the world, knocked me under impression, and made some really like positive and lasting changes in my life. So following that was like, okay, well, what the hell just happened? What do I do with this? And so much to my surprise, I went back to the States where I was living and started teaching yoga and meditation, continuing my own path in that. I discovered that there was an entire emerging sector of psychedelic therapy. So it wasn't just a bunch of, hippies doing drugs in the jungle. There was, a lot of science that supported, how profound and transformational these medicines can be. And so started doing, a ton of research in this, and then ended up, making two pretty sort of major moves. First is moving to Costa Rica to open a psychedelic retreat center and community. And then also beginning to invest in the area of mental health with a specific focus on psychedelics. So ended up joining a fund called Lionheart. I'd won the founding partner, David Langer, had started the fund a little bit earlier. And, as I was starting to get involved in investing in the space and really exploring, I found David very quickly and really liked his style and his thesis. And so we paired up in about 3 years ago in 2021. It's been a ton of fun. So we are, closing out our first fund at Lionheart. I've loved being able to work with entrepreneurs, sort of being on the other side of the table, being able to meet people, hear about their visions and ideas, finding ways to support them. And that just feels like a really incredible time. We're finding great companies and great founders that are doing very cool things.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there. So I've been kind of consciously thinking about things that we could double click on, and there's a lot. But I would say, with Kiva, the risk role that you had, that's really interesting, and I don't know, I think we talked about this too, but like the company Tala, I don't know if you're familiar with the company Tala. They did like a lot of micro lending in Africa.
I think so, yeah.
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 So what was interesting with them was they were able to, because most of the people there had mobile devices, so they were able to derive a lot of risk data from just usage on your mobile phone. And I saw this founder speak a while back, but what's really interesting is there's a likelihood of you having good credit if your phone is usually charged. So it's just unique statistical things, because obviously maybe if you're using your phone more, you got a smartphone, it's charged, maybe you're more responsible, which makes sense. So they found all these really weird, unique nuances to determine risk using just device data. Obviously how often are they on the web? What websites are they searching? Are they searching like personal finance sites? That might also tell you a lot about the person. So the people were able to provide some of their mobile device and software data to Tala, and then Tala was able to kind of create a risk metric, which I thought was interesting. So I don't know what your reactions are on that, and just kind of like thoughts on the future of innovation. But I thought I'd bring that up and see if you had any comments on that, or just maybe shared experiences on the risk side with because there's also risks with Turo, right? I mean, I'm sure some of that came back because somebody doesn't return the car. Maybe there's a risky person that maybe shouldn't be renting out a G-Wagon. So any thoughts on that, or just kind of the innovation around risk management?
Absolutely. I think what's really interesting, and it is a bit of a thread between both of these, is that like risk became something that unlocked the business. At Turo, our innovation was insurance. So when I talk to people in the mobility space, or specifically car sharing, many people will tell me like, I had the idea for this before you. And it's like, well, what'd you do about it?
Yeah.
the it in Turo, there very much was a light bulb moment. There was like a specific moment where I like had the idea for Turo. It was in Boston in 2008. I reserved. It was on Thanksgiving Day. I reserved the closest car to me, and it was 2.5 miles away. And it was one of these days when it was like sleeting upwards. You know, it was like just awful Boston winter. And so I have to go 2.5 miles to the closest car, which I reserved, and sort of like trudging through the sleet and the snow to get to this car,
Yeah.
and passing all these cars that were covered in snow and hadn't been driven in weeks. And I was like, why do I have to pass so many cars to get to that car? Like, why can't I get in that car?
How do you get in the car again? So you reserve the car, and then how do you get in? Do they just is there some code or something to get in, or do they just leave the key in the car?
So it depends. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not unlike Airbnb. So, I think that there's lots of different ways people get into an
Yeah.
Airbnb. Like some people
Sure.
install the digital lock.
Yeah.
Some people will meet you and hand you the key. Some people leave
Mhm.
the key other than that. So each, car owner sort of
Yeah.
figures out
So
the
there
way
is
that
some
makes sense for
mechanism
them.
to be able to kind of like go into the car on your own without a human. Like you can type in a code or something.
It depends on the car. So like
Okay.
some of the cars, we have to have something installed in the car. And so that's like a little
Okay.
bit more of a power user.
Yeah.
Um, But if I just go back to the innovation or the insurance, so there was this moment of like, okay, this I could see this happening. I could see there being this peer-to-peer version of Zipcar where we
Hmm.
leverage the cars that are already on the road. And so my thought was like, there's either somebody doing this or there's a reason why.
Yeah.
And there was nobody doing it. And the reason why eventually I learned was insurance. Like nobody could figure out how to insure those. And this was really the challenge for us. Um, I actually had, at the time I was in business school and I had two co-founders. One of them I chose because she had an insurance background. And she was like, I think I can figure out how to insure this. And she spent 6 months on it,
Hmm.
threw up her hands and was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't think you're going to done. I quit. And it was like, whoa,
So what's
that's
the
a
issue? So
brutal.
you rent a car, and then there's no insurer that will provide insurance for a car rental? Because what does Avis
That's right.
use? Because Avis has a car
So
insurance, backing or something,
right.
right?
So there's two types of insurance policies
Hmm.
before this. There was a personal insurance policy that covers you whenever you're driving your personal car.
Yeah.
That immediately becomes invalidated as soon as it becomes a commercial transaction. So like
Okay.
if you're getting paid money for somebody in your car, your insurance is null and void.
Got it.
And then there are commercial insurance policies. So Avis has a commercial insurance
Hmm.
policy, and that is
Yeah.
something that they have on a car that they own. And so this was
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle where it's like, well, we don't own the business doesn't own the car, and we frankly
Hmm.
don't want to pay insurance full time
Yeah.
because we're not using it all the time, and it won't work for personal insurance. And so
Yeah.
we needed to find a carrier that was said, okay, we understand what's going on here. We'll create this new model in the middle, and so insurance carriers like they need to see data, so we could say, well, hey, it's very similar to car sharing insurance, and they're like, well, but not exactly. So we don't buy, like all the
Yeah.
insurance carriers kept coming back to us and saying, yeah, we were super interested in this. Just come back to us with 6 months of data. And we're like, well, how do we get 6 months of data? Like it's illegal. You can't do it.
Yeah, you can't.
You
Yeah, you
can't
can't
do
even
car
provide
insurance.
data because you can't actually operate the company without
We can't do it.
insurance, right? Yeah.
So
Okay.
what we did was there was one industry expert in car sharing insurance. There's actually a number of small local nonprofits. And there was one person who had insured a bunch of these things. I got to meet him. I convinced him what we were going to do was change the world. And he invested in the company and then moved mountains for us. So
Wow.
it still took us a year and a half from the time that he thought that he had the insurance policy
Hmm.
until we landed it to actually get that done. And it was a pretty brutal process.
Yeah. And then did you face any of the issues that like I guess Uber had with just like, the New York State and kind of like just, not allowing to have Turos on the road? I mean, where they're just kind of state regulators or just city regulators that just are like, look, you can't be in our city. Was that an issue too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, New York specifically was a major challenge for us. They sort of pretty aggressively kicked us out of the state in
Oh
2014, and
wow.
it took us almost a
Yeah.
decade to get us back in.
Jeez.
There was this sort of obscure insurance law that we were in violation of, and
Hmm.
we knew it, and we're just discussing with the state, and instead of working with us, they just sort of like kicked us out. we didn't really understand it because it was like an antiquated law that like every other state had taken off the books. And like, we
Yeah.
didn't feel that there was like some real consumer protections in it. So,
Okay.
and we, I think that like in many of these industries, there was a realization that like, hey, we are for consumer safety. We're for, we think that regulation can be a really good thing,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't think that you should just put us back in like a box. Like
Yeah.
we're not a rental car company. Like there's a lot of differences in the way that we work. There's a lot of things in the infrastructure that we need. There's like, and we like that should be acknowledged in the way that we are, in the way that we are regulated. And so, there was some states that actually proactively were like, hey, we really love this. This is, we think this is great for our local economy. This is bringing, dollars directly into those pockets. This is great for our public transportation systems. They understood that like providing access to mobility makes it easier to live without a car, gets people off of the road, cuts vehicle miles traveled. It might be counterintuitive that providing access to a car leads to less driving, but it does. And so some states were like, we think this is amazing. We want to make sure this works. We want to understand the right way to regulate it, and we proactively will do it. And so that happened in a number of states. But we also had some people who didn't like us growing, and so they went to other states and said, hey, let's try to create laws that make this difficult. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, they were successful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that like I didn't anticipate all of these things. I didn't anticipate. I mean, like there's been dozens of laws that have been passed pretty like very directly related to the work like that we did with Turo, and I didn't anticipate that. But it's definitely happened, and it's sort of one of the just an example of like how things can twist and turn as an entrepreneur, and the curveballs that you've got to be ready for.
I mean, look, great founders, they can break through walls, and you did, and you got through that. I got a funny question for you. So, Uber they had a theatrical show on Showtime called Super Pumped. So if you ever have a show on Showtime, what would the movie be called, or the 8 session series?
The first thing that came to me is like Wheels. I don't know, just
Wheels.
like maybe that. It's like MTV Cribs for like people's cars. Like there's so much personality in. I think that a vehicle can be something that is like a huge identity statement. It's like think back to like James Dean, like Rebel Without a Car, cause like the car was his persona.
Yeah.
And I do like to think that like objects shouldn't define us. I think that there are a lot of people who take a lot of pride in the things that they build and create, and there's a lot of like uniqueness. And so I think that highlighting some of the creativity of the different cars and models, and different antique cars, and just giving sort of a voice and a platform to the people who have like created something really unique and special, I think could be really interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's opportunity for entrepreneurship for car owners too. There could be people that probably have a business just buying cars and throwing them up on Turo, and you're able to create that commerce, and there's also sustainability play, like you said, kind of keeping less cars on the road if they're not being used. I think the innovation could be, at some point where there's something like a Tesla, where you order the Tesla and then the Tesla automatically uses autonomous driving to come to you on its own. Then it's essentially you're making money while you're parked, right? So I think that.
This is the dream. So we'll see, like if or when that happens. But it'd be great to see those things unfold. Yeah. And it will definitely say that like we do see a lot of people making a real business on this. I think that there's a lot of people who have like some people have hundreds of cars, and it's like a real livelihood and creates jobs. I think one of my favorite stories was I was in New York, and I got picked up from or I rented from. Wait, no, was it in New York? I think I was in Boston. Anyways, I rented a car from a guy, and he picked me up. Like one of the nice things about Turo is like people can pick you up from the airport, so you don't have to get in the Hertz rental car, shuttle, and you just get the depending on the place and the owner, like they can just bring the car directly to you. And I got to meet the person and chatted with him, and
then I guess
he was like a starving
home from taking an Uber. So like if he picks you up, then I guess he'd have to get home somehow, right? Maybe just take an Uber, or maybe a
Yeah,
family member picks
maybe
him up.
Uber or public transit, and
Yeah,
airports are usually something that's easy to get to, so people live close by.
yeah,
It can be worth it for them to figure this out.
sure.
Um, but so he sort of shared with me that he was like, sort of a starving actor, and like instead of like waiting tables, whatever you might do to like make it as an actor, he had 5 cars on Turo.
Wow.
So he was able to figure out a way to like finance these cars, and but he was like, "Yep, I'm making money. This is my entire livelihood, so
Yeah,
that I can do what I love." And I was like, "Yes, that's so cool! What a
that's
great
amazing.
story!"
And I mean, look, I mean, do your own. This is not tax advice, so talk to for the audience, talk to a tax, specialist or an attorney. But I've seen some stuff in my feed where, people will buy a G wagon, and there's tax benefits with a G wagon because it's like 6,000 pounds. I think it's the G wagon, and I think there's the Lamborghini SUV. I think that's also like 6,000 pounds. So there's some tax benefits. I think you can write it off because it's a certain weight. So there's like, I forgot the math, but there was a guy that's like, look, I bought a G Wagon, I wrote it off, and then I rented out on Turo. He gave you a shout out. And he's like, I make this amount of money. And like, he was profitable, like making more money than the actual price of the car. Plus, as a business owner, right, if you can find interesting tax write-offs. Again, talk to your accountant. This is not tax advice. But there's just kind of innovative ways as a entrepreneur to do things that's much less efficient, obviously, if you're an employee, right? I mean, so there's benefits to being an entrepreneur. There's benefits to being an S corp versus an LLC. So there's all those different nuances. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing when you can build something that creates commerce and is transformative. But to be honest, I mean, I don't think the concept of Turo is like that much more provocative than like a Lambo rental company, right? I mean, so in terms of like the people that were regulating against you, I felt like there was other incumbents that were still kind of doing a similar thing, right? I guess it wasn't peer to peer, that was a thing, but people are still renting out cars, they're insured. People come to the cars and pick them up. But I think just whenever you're building something that's something new, it's tough to figure out what box to put it in until it kind of becomes more mainstream. So
Yeah. One interesting thing though is that like, what we did find was that there were some companies that like were really resisting what we were doing,
hmm
but there were more companies that were really intrigued. And this is
yeah,
what we saw on the automotive sector. So
hmm
we had a number of car manufacturers um, sort of either look into partnering or actually invest in the company.
wow,
We had more than one car manufacturers invest in the
hmm
company. And what I found this to be so interesting was like, this isn't what you saw when other industries were disrupted.
hmm
Like if you think back to like Napster, like the record labels didn't like try to partner with Napster; they shut it down. And in that they like missed the boat, right? Like
yeah,
they weren't like, oh wow, there's a change in consumer preferences happening. Let's figure it out. They were like, we got to shut this thing down, and they didn't
yeah,
learn, right? And they missed the boat.
yeah,
And so what I saw the auto manufacturers doing is seeing like, okay, disruption is happening. There's a different model here of being able to
hmm
access mobility instead of just selling a car. What can we learn from this, and can we actually participate in our own disruption? And I think that's so it's certainly not happened, like everybody in the industry and all the industries that were touched. I mean,
hmm
car rental is sort of like the most direct one that we were bumping up against, but also just mobility in general, as well as
hmm
vehicle ownership and the car manufacturers. But it was interesting to see that there were some players that were more trying to learn from and work from the disruption than just stop it.
yeah. And then so look, I mean, you became very successful with Turo. You've obviously done some amazing things now, in the yoga instruction space, and now switching gears, being an investor. What are some things with you knowing yourself, as a founder, and obviously the mental challenges that you had, obviously with just kind of going through the challenges of just being a business person. What are some traits that you look for in a founder? That have been consistent, and maybe you could talk about like maybe the difference between pre-seed versus seed. When you started Turo, were you still very much pre-seed? I guess when you started in
Yeah.
college, yeah. So tell me about that. So what are the characteristics that you think are going to make founders successful? And it probably varies from pre-seed to seed, right? There's a little more traction when you get to the seed stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like it depends a little bit on like the sector.
Hmm.
So Lionheart, our first mental health fund, invests, pretty broadly across, um, you know, uh, more broadly, we'd say that we like to invest in companies that are expanding human consciousness, and addressing an issue, some of the major mental health issues that are pressing today. We see these as some of the most pressing issues that we have in society, and so we invest in the mental health fund invests in three key areas. Psychedelic medicine is the first area, and it's the largest of the fund. Probably about 60% of the dollars in the first fund have gone towards psychedelic medicine. The second big area is consumer and B2B apps. And then the last is neurotech and wearables. So the within psychedelic medicine, I think one of the things that we want to see is um, sort of a long history of commitment to this area. So
Hmm.
psychedelics have had a really interesting past. They, sort of the West sort of discovered them in like the 50s. There was a period of about 2 decades of research and broad experimentation throughout society, and then it got sort of slammed shut by the Nixon administration and the war on drugs,
Hmm.
really leaving behind just some incredibly promising research. So moving away from
Yeah.
just like the Tim Leary and electric acid test, there
Hmm.
was electric Kool-Aid test. Uh, there was just a ton of research being done that was suggesting that psychedelic medicine can be the most profound medicines that we have for mental health, and all of that was sort of lost and forgotten. Primarily lost and forgotten for decades.
Yeah.
There were some people who were so committed to this that they kept doing things underground for decades, and then really in a little after 2010, things started to open back up again, as there was one group, organization MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, was bringing MDMA through the FDA clinical trials to treat PTSD. And as that was starting to show more promise, the industry sort of started to wake back up again.
Hmm.
And that's had incredible progress. MAPS has now completed their third and final phase of clinical trials to treat PTSD, with incredible success. Really, by far, the most impactful way to treat PTSD out there, which is super important for millions of people who have PTSD, not the least of whom are veterans, who have done incredible work to dedicate their lives to our country, and don't have a lot of great options. And
Hmm.
so, it's looking very promising that that MDMA will be approved in the near future, and so as this has moved along, the industry has really woken up again, and so in some cases, what we can see is founders who have been dedicated to this for decades, who are really at the top of their game, the top of their fields, and to have decades of sort of unrealized research that is just like clamoring to get out. And so, here we can invest in some of the best people in the industry, and and some of these insights that have just been dying to get out for decades. And so,
Yeah.
we can take a look at these. In many cases, there's actually really strong evidence that the therapies are safe and effective. If you're as a biotech investor, that's really what you want to see, that drugs are safe and effective. And
Hmm.
in many cases, we know that these medicines are safe and effective. And so, it's a really interesting place where a lot of the rest of sort of the biotech world, pharma or the major biotech funds, like they don't really know how to think about psychedelics. They're not willing to invest in it, and so generally, those medicines are undervalued. And we take a look at that and we say, well, these are undervalued, and actually, they're lower risk
Hmm.
than a normal therapeutic. And so
Yeah.
we're like, we'll take that bet. We understand this space,
Yeah.
and so we've been able to work with people that are incredibly passionate. They're incredibly smart, really at the top of their game, the top of their field, and just really waiting for somebody to understand them and take a chance. And
Yeah.
we're like, let's go.
And are the what are the technologies and the founders that you're most excited about? Is it more on the B2B SaaS side, like with software that augments the workflow? And then are there also like new types of agriculture tech that can kind of like, grow different, plants and sources of the psilocybin, or just all the above?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much cool stuff that we're looking at right now that I'm really excited about. You know, we've uh, we definitely have in looking at a number of investing in a number of B2B tools. I
Hmm.
think that there's a lot of work to be done to supporting the growth of the industry.
Yeah.
One of the companies we invested in is called Trek Health, and
Hmm.
so they deeply understand some of the just the deep inefficiencies in the way the mental health industry works.
Yeah.
If you look across sort of the healthcare sector, about 90% of transactions touch insurance one way. If you look at mental health, it's much lower at about 50%. This is just deep inefficiencies in the industry, and so they built a business to make things much easier to make billing much easier in the mental health space,
Hmm.
really with the goal of increasing insurance penetration and making things much more accessible. So in
Okay.
that, we think there's an incredible business. The business is built on deep insights from many years in an adjacent sector. And so, yeah, this is again like another type of founder we'd love to work with, somebody who has deep experience and insights from sort of a time at an adjacent company, somebody who's incredibly passionate. So mental health has touched them in a really meaningful way. And so there's a strong why. I think that the why is important. It's important to motivate a founder to keep going when things get really hard, and also to really rally a team. And so
Hmm.
um, the we just invested in a company that's created a neurotech device. So this is getting into some like deep science that's really exciting. It reduces neural inflammation, so it can show that like inflammation in the brain has like many different manifestations, and so
Yeah.
this is shown to reduce that. And so it's really interesting. We can invest in science and look at how compelling this is.
Hmm.
Um, and then one thing that we're looking at now is the impact of the microbiome on mental health. So
Yeah.
we're really just learning the microbiome has such a deep, so like the micro, the billions of microbiota in our digestive tract,
Hmm.
have an incredible impact on overall health. And there it actually is a deep impact specific on mental health. It's called the gut brain axis. And
Hmm.
so we're really diving in to understand a little better what are the big opportunities here and who are the horses we should back.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I mean, really appreciated all the storytelling and just getting to know you a little more. I mean, I had a lot of fun hanging out with you, a couple months ago, and excited to just share your story with the community. And look me up when you get back out to New York, and we'll get together.
Awesome, Joel. Well, it's great to reconnect. Appreciate having me on.
Yeah.
Thanks a
Thank you
lot.
so much, Ellie. Shelby, take care.
Bye.
Bye.